Hello, everybody, and my name is Graeme Reid. I'm the Director of Exhibitions here at the Museum of Wisconsin Art, and I'm going to be giving a talk today entitled Wisconsin Women, Rebels, Movers, and Shakers. And the reason for giving this talk is that we currently have, up until October 3rd, we have an exhibition called Claiming Space. And this exhibition was mounted to mark our 60th anniversary year because the museum was founded in 1961 by three women, Melita Suda Pick and her two daughters, and to collect the work of their uncle Karl von Marr. And so we thought with that founding of the museum by three women, we thought we should mark our 60th anniversary year by celebrating women artists here in Wisconsin. And Laurie Winters, Ali Wilbur, Tyler Friedman, and myself had many meetings about the content of this exhibition. And at one point, it was going to be historic and contemporary. And then as we kind of met over the winter and early spring, we decided to focus just on the contemporary artists, contemporary women artists here in Wisconsin. So that's what we did. But we can't ignore the women, the ladies who came before this. And to kind of paraphrase Isaac Newton, who wrote in 1676 to his rival Robert Hooke, "What Descartes did was a good step. You have added much, several ways, and especially in taking the colors of thin plates into philosophical consideration." But the next sentence is the most important one you actually might be familiar with. And Isaac Newton said, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." And this notion of building upon the work done previously by others still very much holds true if people are prepared to be honest. The problem is that the accomplishments of women are often ignored, dismissed, minimized, or simply unknown. And today, women are slowly but surely gaining their rightful place in recognition for their endeavors and accomplishments. And today, I'd like to share the stories of four remarkable women who provided leadership in the arts in Milwaukee at a time when it was not just unusual, but almost unheard of. Milwaukee in the mid-19th century. As Milwaukee was establishing itself as a city and Wisconsin as a state, it was inevitably a boys' club who were at the head of affairs. Driven, determined, and occasionally ruthless, they set the stage for what the city was to become, and their legacy lives on through their names, their neighborhoods, streets, and awkwardly positioned bridges. We have three founders of Milwaukee. We have Byron Kilbourn, Solomon Juneau, and George Walker. Juneau was basically developing east of the river. Kilbourn was west of the river, and George Walker was just south of what is now downtown. But just as Milwaukee was growing as a city, in 1861, the American Civil War broke out. Alexander Mitchell, major player in the growth of Milwaukee. Now, as in 1861, the American Civil War broke out, and while no battles were fought in Wisconsin, the state did send around 90,000 troops to the conflict. Such was the carnage, not just in lives lost, but in bodies mutilated, that the need arose after the war to provide health and rehabilitative facilities for the veterans. Let me give you a few facts. The war produced about 1,030,000 casualties, which was about 3% of the population, including about 620,000 soldier deaths. Based on the 1860 census figures, 8% of all white males between 13 to 43 died in the war, 6% in the north, 18% in the south. 56,000 died in prisons. In the booming city of Milwaukee, Solomon Juneau, Byron Kilbourn, George Walker, Alexander Mitchell, they were kings. In 1840, as a 7-year-old, Lydia Ely arrived in Milwaukee, and in 1855, she married Gideon Pierce Hewitt. They divorced in 1882 because she preferred the freedom to travel and paint to the restrictions and duties of married life. Remember, this was at a time when divorce carried immense social stigma. Clearly, Lydia cared not a hoot for such conventions and attitudes. Remember, it was not until 1920 that women could vote with the adoption of the 19th Amendment. How restrictive was married life for women in the late 19th century? To emphasize the role that women were expected to fulfill, I'd like to quote a US Supreme Court ruling from 1873 that upheld an Illinois law which prohibited women from becoming attorneys. Quote, "Man is or should be woman's protector and defender. The natural and proper timidity and delicacy which belongs to the female sex evidently unfits it for many of the occupations of civil life. The paramount destiny and mission of women to fulfill is the noble and benign office of wife and mother. This is the law of the Creator, and the rules of civil society must be adapted to the general constitution of things and cannot be based on exceptional cases." Well, if there was an exceptional case, it was Lydia Ely. During the war, she, together with Henrietta Kilbourn, Byron's wife, and Alexander Mitchell's wife, they raised money through the West Side Ladies' Aid Society. In 1864, this organization was renamed the Milwaukee Soldiers' Home Society upon a realization that the war's end would see a lot of men needing prolonged medical care. Lydia was made president. In February 1865, the Wisconsin Soldiers' Home was established through the state legislative charter, and the battle began for Milwaukee to be selected as the site for one of the national soldiers' homes. Lydia organized the Soldiers' Home Fair, which raised $100,000, including $75,000 for land acquisition. The goal was for Milwaukee to be the site of one of the 7 planned soldiers' homes to care for the wounded veterans. Milwaukee was indeed chosen. Dayton, Ohio, Togus, Maine, Hampton, Virginia, Marion, Indiana, Leavenworth, Kansas, and Santa Monica in California were the others. Once opened, the Veterans Hospital in Milwaukee, or to give it its full name, the Northwestern Branch National Home for Disabled Volunteer Soldiers, was in demand. By 1870, 500 veterans had been admitted. By 1880, 1,000 vets, and by 1890, 2,500 veterans. Board membership was restricted to women, and the first name listed was Mrs. G.P. Hewitt, otherwise known as Lydia Ely. But caring for the welfare of others was not the only activity Lydia participated in. As a committed artist in 1870, she went on a horseback and wagon painting trip to Colorado. In 1882, she made the grand tour of Europe. After that, she opened a studio and a school in the city's iron block, where many artists had studios. In 1881, the Milwaukee Industrial Exposition was held. Lydia directed the Fine Arts Division. She was a friend of H. Bennett, the pioneering photographer based in Kilbourn City, now the Wisconsin Dells. Nevertheless, the call of public duty and service was central to Lydia's core beliefs and nature. Here's a painting by Lydia, and there is a Stereoview by H. Bennett of Lydia, taken in the Wisconsin Dells, probably in about the mid-1870s, judging by the clothing and the date of Lydia. But in the 1880s, the Civil War remained very much in the public's consciousness through the work of the Panorama Painters, who worked in the city and whose canvases traveled the country. One of the principal subjects of these colossal canvases were Civil War battle scenes. Religious scenes were another, and the Panorama Painters, the Milwaukee Panorama Painters, painting the Battle of Atlanta is still on view in Atlanta, Georgia. Yet, while Milwaukee had one of the 7 national soldiers' homes, it still had no Civil War monument, 20 years after the war's end. Who would spearhead the effort to resolve this embarrassing issue? Alexander Mitchell had plans drawn up, but he died before anything could be done. His son took up the baton, but his efforts foundered due to his severe financial difficulties and his position in the U.S. Senate. Lawyers got involved, papers flew, senatorial privileges were invoked, the Supreme Court was involved. Still, Milwaukee had no monument. Step forward, Lydia Ely. But how would she do it? It was going to take $30,000 to build an appropriate monument. Her idea was brilliant. She would assemble an autograph book of the rich, the famous, and the prominent throughout the country. Or, as she put it, quote, a governmental, historical, artistic, scientific, and general contemporary autographic exponent of our own country, end quote. Each selected prominent and worthy person was sent a stamped double envelope containing a slip of handmade engraved paper, watermarked Soldiers Monument, Milwaukee, an addressed circular letter outlining the request. However, the backing of prominent citizens was needed to get things rolling. Mr. Ely and Mr. Pfister pledged $500 each. Various bazaars were netting $16,000, and a baseball game raised $168. But most importantly, a buyer for this most unique object was needed. Step forward, Captain Pabst, who had a strong track record of supporting veterans. The good beer baron pledged $8,000. The money was raised, and the Milwaukee Civil War Monument was unveiled on June 28, 1898, and still stands today thanks to the efforts of Lydia Ely. As for the autograph book, it is a treasured possession in the care of the Milwaukee Public Library since 1913 when it was donated to them. It resides in the rare books section and contains 2,283 signatures. When closed, as it is in this picture, it's 23.5 inches long, 18 inches wide, and 7 inches deep. When it's opened, it's approximately 47 inches across and weighs about 50 pounds. And many of the signatures are just that, a signature. Lydia recalled the process. Most of them contented themselves with inscribing their names. A few of them tabulated neat little autobiographies, registering the successive steps in their stellar careers. One or two of them wrote down sentences, sonorous even in black and white. A number of them write very badly and not even pursue an intelligent straight line as the shortest distance between 2 points, probably because they regard it as unconstitutional ever to just see where they are going. Most of them are well-ordered, fat-lettered compliances to do as they are told. Now, who signed this book? There's the book open in the library. And here we have Thomas Edison. We have Maxfield Parrish with a marvelous drawing. We have, let's see, Mark Twain. And there's a wonderful quote from Mark Twain. "Do not use your morals weekdays. It gets them out of repair for Sunday." Great one from Mark Twain. John Philip Sousa, Winslow Homer, and of course, Captain Pabst. Now, another male titan of Lake Milwaukee, and this book is still in the library. I do believe you have to make an appointment to see it, but this book is a treasured and unique possession of the Milwaukee Public Library and would not have come about without the efforts of Lydia Ely. Now, besides Captain Pabst, one of the other male titans of Milwaukee in the late 19th century was Frederick Layton. To his credit, he actually got things built. Layton built his fortune in the meatpacking industry. He was English by birth, but a Milwaukeean by adoption. He returned to England and Europe regularly, where he saw the finest arts available. And this gave him the notion to give Milwaukee some culture through a fine art gallery. And he explained that his gallery would, quote, "be of benefit to our working people, as well as the more wealthy, since all may come and find pleasure and recreation in paying a visit to the gallery," end quote. And the Layton Art Gallery was one of the first single-patron art galleries in the United States. It was a resounding success and became a defining Milwaukee landmark for its generation. Alas, it featured little in the way of Wisconsin art, focusing on some American but mostly European works, and it was located on the corner of North Jefferson and Mason. Layton died in 1919, but his gallery lived on and continued to prosper, and it did so through two women, Charlotte Partridge and Miriam Frink. Charlotte Partridge had studied at the Art Institute of Chicago, and by 1914 was on the staff of Milwaukee Downer College, a school for women. By 1916, she went from teacher to director. At the Milwaukee Downer, she met Miriam Frink, a professor of literature. They remained devoted to each other for the rest of their lives. In 1920, Charlotte was given permission to use the basement of the gallery for her school after the trustees eased out George Rabb, the previous director of the gallery, who had been strongly against using the building as a school And during his 20 years, there had mounted no exhibitions, little programming, and had acquired little. Charlotte Partridge brought Miriam on board because she thought the whole proposal was fun. They made the perfect pair, Charlotte being described as the feet of the organization and Miriam the head. The school was an instant success and soon incorporated as a separate non-profit from the gallery upstairs. And the primary aim of the school was to train young men and women to learn living as artists. In line with Partridge's ideology, the school was particularly progressive for its time. Co-educational life study classes were held with live models, and studies in drama, music, poetry, literature, and even psychology were required. Partridge and Frink believed that broad curricula encouraged students to better understand art in all its forms. In 1922, Charlotte introduced a bold modernist vision to the Layton Art Gallery. Her appointment as curator of the gallery was notable for its time, when few women occupied senior positions in American art museums. And by the 1940s, she was one of the most respected art educators in the country. Partridge had Charlotte, I beg your pardon. Charlotte had a strong commitment to modernism, and during a top-to-bottom makeover of the Layton Gallery, she removed dozens of Victorian paintings. So here's kind of the old way that paintings were displayed. It was kind of salon style. I mean, this would have been France, London, Paris, you name it. This is how paintings were generally hung, squeezed together, stacked high on the walls. Actually, if you look at this painting, you can see that some of these paintings are really quite large, and they're stacked on top of each other. However, Charlotte decided to cover the dark maroon walls in a light tan and replace this salon-style hanging with works displayed at eye height in a line around the room. Now, you might think that's kind of how we do it now. You might think that's how it's always been done, but no, the salon style was the traditional way of doing it. So to hang works like this individually at an eye level height was really quite radical at the time. And these radical changes, which kind of predated the modernist Whyte cube made famous by the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, transformed the way that visitors experienced art in the gallery. In many ways, what is now considered normal installation practice in museums was pioneered by Charlotte in Milwaukee. She also brought in temporary walls, electric lighting, temporary exhibition space, a loan program, free Saturday morning art classes for children, and a new focus on Wisconsin artists. In 1930, against much opposition, she collaborated with Frank Lloyd Wright to mount a major exhibition of his models and plans. Wright's rather uncompromising views on Milwaukee's traditional architecture enraged the local press, and Wright dealt with some unsavory financial matters, including getting his lecture fee from Charlotte minutes before attempts were made to garnish it. In Charlotte, though, Frank Lloyd Wright found a kindred spirit, saying, quote, "Miss Partridge by now has been reproached by Milwaukee architects for bringing disgrace upon the city by having me there. She didn't seem to care. She is something of a captain herself." The moribund had become magical. Charlotte also developed a passion for regional artists, and she brought their work into the Layton Art Gallery. Garrett Sinclair taught at the school for 30 years. She further championed Artists of the Day by serving as director of the Federal Art Project in Wisconsin, a Depression-era initiative that helped employ the nation's artists. However, starting in the 1940s, Partridge advocated for the creation of the War Memorial Center, the Eero Saarinen design building hailed as a masterpiece of modernism. It was finally built in 1957. Stirring echoes of her predecessor Lydia Ely 50 years before. However, before that in 1951, a new home for the Layton School of Art was to be constructed, as the original building was far too small to accommodate demand, and Charlotte oversaw the design of what would become one of Milwaukee's first major modernist buildings at 1362 North Prospect Avenue. So here you can see Charlotte with Malcolm Whyte and Charles Zadok, the designers of the building, the architects of the building, and a model of it. And there it is. In case you're wondering where it is or where it was, If you drive along Wisconsin Avenue, swing north and go up Prospect Avenue, just before you get to what is now the Jewish Museum on the east side of the river, there's a large gap. That is where the Layton School was. It was just next to what is now the Jewish Museum on Prospect Avenue. And it was demolished in 1970 to make way for the never-built Park East Freeway. In other words, an architectural masterpiece was lost to poor civic planning. And that was not the only destruction. In March 1954, on the pretext of their ages, Charlotte was 71 and Miriam was 61, the two women who had taken a moribund gallery and transformed it into a nationally renowned and celebrated art school were asked to retire. Charlotte remembered being told that the school would be better, quote, if directed by a man. Image. There's another shot of the museum. This is obviously taken from kind of high up in the air, but your Lincoln Memorial Drive is basically what you can see right in the foreground, and there's the building right behind it. So the Jewish Museum would be off to the right as we're looking at this picture, and then Prospect Avenue is right on the other side of the building. So the whole notion of that being better run if directed by a man was rather ironic, given the fact that the Laytons seemed to have been doing just fine under the direction of women. And as if you drive along Lincoln Memorial Drive and look west up the embankment next to the Jewish Museum, you can still see a couple of crumbling concrete columns. There's a fantastic view of the Layton School at night, taken from Lincoln Memorial Drive. Charlotte and Miriam with their dogs. And that's probably all that really remains of the Layton School of Art, a couple of columns in the embankment next to Lincoln Memorial Drive. Which is, these are essentially two columns, shameful remnants of a brilliant building and inspired leadership. At the same time as Charlotte and Miriam were transforming the Layton School of Art into a national leader in the arts education, the Great Depression hit the United States and Milwaukee was not spared. The Layton School survived, thanks not simply because of the leadership of Charlotte and Miriam, but an exceptional gift of $130,000 from the trustee, Dr. Ernest Copeland, which helped them through the lean years. And there were many WPA Works Progress Administration projects in Milwaukee, and this also included Charlotte being appointed the Wisconsin State Director of the Federal Art Project. And while these projects were diverse, worthy, and very much needed, they had one thing in common. They overwhelmingly employed men. One group, one constituency that was to a great extent ignored was women, particularly African Americans and the semi or unskilled. Just as is the case today, not all households had two adults bringing home wages. Only one member of a household, preferably the male, was allowed to be certified for relief work under the WPA. Many women were widows, abandoned, or married to someone unable to work. What was to happen to them? So in August 1935, Harriet Pettibone Clinton was appointed district supervisor of the WPA Women's Projects in Milwaukee County. There were hundreds of women classified as unskilled, but in need of relief. What could be done with such people? Elsa Ulbricht was a teacher at the Milwaukee State Teachers College and had the idea that these unskilled women could be taught to make a variety of objects that could be used in schools and other state institutions. Ulbricht, in addition to being an accomplished artist in her own right, we've got several paintings here by Elsa, and they're just wonderful portraits. And you can kind of see the way she's got a tremendous sense of color, and then composition, the way that the kind of background, this kind of ebbs and flows and curves. Tennis player, probably also from the 1930s. And then she also did a lot of puppet theater as well. And here's a painting of kind of the back of the stage of the puppet theater. But Elsa was also a member of the Wisconsin Society of Applied Arts, now known as the Wisconsin Designer Craft Council, and as such had a tremendous appreciation of the value of good design and craftsmanship. And during our conversations with Clinton, Elsa was wary and skeptical. She recounted, quote, "One of Clinton's suggestions to me, and I can remember this so well, was that we could cut out some pictures from wallpaper and make scrapbooks. And knowing her very well, I said, well, I don't think that would be interesting enough for me. And if that's what we're going to do, I don't want this job." She then added, "If the work can't be done along art lines, I am not interested." And Elsa was justifiably apprehensive about who would run and supervise the program. She discovered that skilled workers on relief had already been culled for other projects, including a women's sewing project. In short, she had access to people who were basically deemed unemployable. Also, in Elsa's opinion, quote, "It would be inexcusable to expend valuable time and effort to dissipate federal money on work which had no educational significance or did not contribute to the cultural development of the individual and community." Two crucial words are used here: educational and cultural. So, to find supervisors, Elsa searched unemployment relief roles, looking for out-of-work artists and craftsmen to act as supervisors on the project, but found only the unskilled women. All WPA projects were allowed to hire non-relief persons to act in supervisory positions, but non-relief workers were limited to less than 5% of the entire workforce of a project. Elsa, in what could be described as a fortuitous epiphany, decided to use this role to hire her own students and former students. These students became designer foremen who oversaw each of the 11 work units and were responsible for product design and production. Mary June Kellogg, a fourth-year student, was asked by Elsa to delay her graduation and serve as the program's overall art director for the project. Anne Feldman was responsible for WP administrative issues and staffing. For many of these students, having come of age during the Depression, they had no job to go to upon graduation because schools weren't hiring, and they really weren't hiring art teachers. And they were already familiar with each other and Elsa and ready to work on an exciting, challenging project. And the project, when it came into being, was called the Milwaukee Handicraft Project, and its aim was to, quote, "make by hand household articles of wood, paper, yarn, and cloth. The objects made will be distributed to relief families, nursery schools serving relief families, and publicly owned institutions." So we know who led the program, who supervised the program, but who was actually employed in a program that essentially catered to those found inadequate to fill other positions. On a very cold morning in November 1936, 200 women lined up for work. Many were physically and emotionally exhausted by years of relief subsistence and no prospects of work. Within 3 weeks, another 600 workers had joined the group. And Elsa described the first day of the project in an article for Design magazine. When the Milwaukee Handicraft Project opened its doors November 6, 1935, 1935, not 1936, a motley, careworn and harassed group of women were greeted and received by a small number of eager and socially sensitive young women and men into whose hands they were to be entrusted. They had been assigned from the relief lists of the United States Employment Service in groups of 50 and 100 at a time. Those who reported that memorable morning and the following few mornings were nervous and excited, many of them arriving long before 8 o'clock, having walked long distances. They manifested uneasiness, uncertainty, and great apprehension of their ability to meet the needs of this job to which they had been indiscriminately assigned and of this project about which they knew nothing. Many of them had had no work or very meager work experiences. Many had been out of employment for so many months that they had become disheartened and depressed. They were of all ages, all nationalities, some speaking very broken English. Some could neither read nor write, Negro and white, of all degrees of intelligence and education. Many were poorly clothed, even unkempt, and some appeared physically weak from the lack of nourishment, medical attention, and insecurity suffered for so long a time. But, led by Elsa and the art students, what was produced by this group of women? Dolls, toys, quilts, draperies, furniture, bookbinding, weaving, textile printing under the supervision of designer technicians from the Milwaukee State Teachers College Art Department. New dolls and toys were tested in local kindergartens and nurseries before beginning mass production. And an elected workers' council set many of the administrative policies, handled disciplinary issues, and organized social functions for the workers. And at its peak, the Milwaukee Handicraft Project employed 1,350 workers in 3 floors of a factory building at 1215 North Market Street. And it made its products available to governments, schools, nurseries, and hospitals throughout the country. For example, college dormitories received printed curtains, rugs, and furniture. Dolls went to orphanages and WPA nurseries. All workers were paid the standard WPA wage of $60 a month, regardless of age, race, or gender. They also received some medical attention, as Elsa and her mostly middle-class students were shocked and distressed at the physical and mental condition of many of the women. In order to keep the program moving forward, and this to me is genius, the workers were given 2 streetcar tickets so they could get to and from work without walking, because even the usual fare was often beyond their income level. And Elsa and her team wanted there to be no excuses for not coming into work. The handicraft project was novel, but not in more ways than the staffing, project, and product and goals would initially suggest. Elsa, Rice, and others vowed not to have their project be segregated. Kellogg recalled, quote, "The idea that race should determine where and when one worked offended our sense of fairness," end quote. The racial integration of the workplace and the possibility and reality of African American women attaining supervisory positions was quite revolutionary. 25% of the Milwaukee Handicraft Project workforce was Black at a time when only 2% of the county's population was Black. So, what did these hundreds of women with little to no skills make under the guidance of their cheerful young supervisors? Let's look at the different areas that the project worked on. So there's the bookbinding unit, and here they are busy working away. And if you look closely, you can see the fact that it is not a segregated workforce. There was the Kendrick Bell images. Kendrick Bell did a book about all the animals at the zoo. There were these fantastic drawings with little rhymes. The monkey is busy and active all day. He finds it is easy to be happy that way. And this ties very much into the educational aspect of it. Because you've got charming images that would appeal to children, but you also got very short, funny little 4-line rhymes that, if you're teaching a child to read, they're going to be engaged by the image, and then you can teach them how to read and how to pronounce words. Ludwig Sonatel, Come and Sing. So there's a book of songs. Textiles. We had textiles. There was a loom. They actually had to build, this is actually a very small loom. They actually had to build their own looms. Some of them were enormous for the rugs that they wanted to make. Theatre costumes. I believe these were in our exhibition a few years ago. Many of these were borrowed from the Milwaukee County Historical Society of Mount Mary College. And so these were theatre costumes. You can see there's a couple of historical ones there in the background. They also did, for the costume unit, one of the costumes was actually worn by an actor from Kenosha that you may have heard of called Orson Welles, who was involved in the Federal Theatre Project in the 1930s that actually ordered costumes from the Handicraft Project. And so we have soft toys. The rugs in the furniture unit were pretty interesting because they used a lot of cotton and wool strip waste product. Because one of the things about the Handicraft Project was they did not have an endless supply of top quality materials. A lot of times they had to kind of look around, dig around, see what they could get. And many of the blankets and rugs were using what we would actually now call recycled product. Furniture was custom made, but you can just see that the design factors are really quite incredible. And so here's a display of some of the items. And actually, what was interesting was as the project progressed, it became almost an interior design outlet service, if you like. You could get chairs, you could get furniture, you could get rugs, you could get curtains, you could get drapes. And so if a school or a hospital or an orphanage came and said, we want to basically renovate our space, they could come in and say, well, here's what we can offer you. We can offer you furniture and tables and drapes and rugs. And what's also interesting about some of the furniture is that I always tend to call it mid-century modern before mid-century modern even was a thing, because the design, because of the workshops, because of the labor, because of the materials, nothing could be overly fancy. There was no fancy scroll work or carving or milling. It was very sturdy, and it also had to be very sturdy furniture because it was going into mostly public institutions. So the furniture, very little of it, I should say, has actually survived. Once you get through the Depression, once you get through the Second World War, as much as we kind of look back on the Milwaukee Handicraft Project with somewhat rose-tinted spectacles, had you lived through the Depression and the Second World War, you did not look back on it with a great deal of affection. So a lot of the furniture, I believe, probably in the 60s, 70s, 80s, was all just tossed. We did have a couple of chairs in the exhibition that were rescued or discovered in the break room at the Milwaukee Public Library. So there's probably some still out there, but they are very much the exception rather than the rule. So making dolls. The dolls were basically mass produced. The furniture was much more done kind of on a as needed commission basis. I mean, you didn't have room to kind of store colossal amounts of furniture, but dolls they certainly could. And the dolls are really kind of probably the most famous unit. They made cloth dolls and they made wardrobes for nursery schools and institutions. 4,000 dolls were produced one Christmas. And dolls were made in historical costumes for the State Historical Museum in Madison. And these dolls were one of the most popular products produced, and they varied in price as the ledger inventory book of the offerings. They basically produced almost like a catalog of the handicraft project's offerings, and you could basically use it as an order book. Dolls varied in cost. It was $1.50 for a pair of 16-inch boy and girl, or to $2.25 for an American doll with black bob hair and bangs. And extra wardrobes could actually be ordered. But one of the issues with the doll was that the dolls had to be sturdy, washable, and have snaps or buttons that worked so children could be taught to dress themselves. So this is one of the international dolls with Scotch Boy. There's the 22-inch American Girl, black braids with bangs. 22-inch American Girl, blonde bob with bangs. And they actually produced what was termed in the program as the Negro Girl. And this is particularly notable because, as I've mentioned, proportionally a larger number of the workers in the program were African American. And what's particularly interesting about this doll is that they simply used the same head that they used for all the other dolls, whether it was male or female. There's an artist called Dick Wyken made the head, and he made it it was a somewhat androgynous head. It could work as a male or a female head. But when they did the Negro Girl doll, they just simply took the head and just painted it a different color. They didn't say, well, if we were going to be doing an African-American doll, black doll, we should be changing the physiognomy of the face. No, they just simply changed the hair to black and painted the skin a different color. All the clothes, no matter which doll, 22-inch doll it was, all the clothes could go back and forwards. So, which again goes back to the educational aspect that Elsa was so insistent upon, was that, all the snaps, all the laces, all the ribbons and ties on the dresses and clothes worked, because she figured that a child would dress and undress dolls and move the clothes around and basically teach themselves how to dress themselves. So one of the issues, dolls had to be sturdy, but fortunately, the handicraft project was sent a lady called Helen Clark. She was a stern, austere woman in her 50s, but she had extensive doll making experience, and a production line was set up to meet demand. But here the success was actually almost a hindrance. As workers became proficient on the large electric sewing machines, they were transferred to the sewing project, which left the doll section of the handicraft project that needed more workers that needed to be trained. And over the course of the project from 1935 to 1943, 5,000 workers passed through the project. And at any one time during these years, between 100 and 1,350 were employed. And a high-profile supporter of the project outside of Milwaukee was Eleanor Roosevelt, who toured the project in November 1936 and wrote about it in her My Day column. And Mrs. Roosevelt wrote, quote, "I have just come back from one of the most interesting mornings I have ever spent. Milwaukee has a handicrafts project for unskilled women which gives one a perfect thrill. They are doing artistic work under most able teachers. The interesting thing is that in spite of the fact that these women have had few educational advantages and were so unskilled they were rejected on the sewing project, they are both developing taste and skill." The handicraft project survived until 1942, despite valiant efforts that withered away during the war as industrial production shifted focus and unemployment dropped dramatically. Nevertheless, the impact of it was profound. Letters to Ulbricht from workers shed light on their feelings. June Toot wrote, "I like the project very much. It will help us later on when looking for private employment because we've learned to cooperate while working in a large group." Rose de Soto wrote, "Before I started here, I did not know anything about different colors of inks or paints. It seemed rather difficult at first, but not anymore. I wish I could express myself more plainly just what this means to me, but words fail me." The fact that it was more than just about the wages paid is borne out by a comment by Odessa Garrett in a letter to Elsa. Quote, "I have worked on the project for over a year. The money paid me has been a great help, but there are other benefits. These benefits couldn't be calculated in dollars and cents. I work in the block printing unit, which is new to me and therefore more interesting. Most people think it is wonderful, and I do myself. We have learned to appreciate color, harmony designing, and the quality of materials." And following the dissolution of the Milwaukee Handicraft Project, it became the Milwaukee County Handicraft Project. Many of the designs, blocks, screens, and samples were dispersed or discarded. The Depression was over, and there was little appetite to recall the experience. Some examples went appropriately to Elsa Ulbricht, and this collection ended up, thankfully, at the Milwaukee Public Museum. The Milwaukee Public Library also ended up owning a significant cache of material. And as I said, 2 rare chairs were discovered in the break room at the public library. The Civil War Memorial is still on Wisconsin Avenue, and the original soldiers' home has been expanded to cope with the human casualties of subsequent wars. The Layton School is gone, or certainly the building is, but many alumni are still alive, and the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design is basically the reincarnation of what was the Layton School of Art. The WPA programs produced a wealth of materials, the surviving artifacts becoming highly collectible and cherished. But whether present or not, the physical and spiritual legacies of these 4 remarkable women are still with us. Thank you very much for watching today. And Claiming Space is on view at the Museum of Wisconsin Art here in West Bend until October 3rd. Thanks very much.